Okay.
Okay, so let's start. First of all, I'd like to thank you for joining this session. And this is our agenda. We have already completed 3 modules: identity and access management, hybrid identities. And last weekend we saw about virtual networks, and now we will be implementing Azure virtual machines. Okay. So in Active Directory, we saw how we can use Active Directory for our authentication purposes. In hybrid identity, we saw how we can synchronize our on-prem identity with Azure Active Directory. In Azure Virtual Networks, we saw how can we create networks and then deploy VMs onto it, and how can we ensure that there is communication between different VNets in Azure. And now we will be deploying virtual machines. Okay. So what exactly are virtual machines? So we can define virtual machines as software computers. Okay. So these are not hardware computers, means I don't need a laptop or something to create a virtual machine in Azure. It will be directly created on Azure platform. Okay. So I'm not hosting that virtual machine. Azure is hosting that virtual machine on behalf of me. So it's just a software computer. And if you want any server to be up and running, you can you just need to do few clicks and your server is ready. Okay. Doesn't matter if you're having a Windows server or a Linux server. Okay. These are scalable compute resource. Scalable in the sense, now let's say you have an idea and you want to deploy a website. So if I want to deploy a website, what are the requirements? The requirements are you should have a server with you. On that server, on that hardware server, you'll be deploying an operating system. Let's say in our case, we are deploying Windows operating system. On top of that Windows operating system, I should have that IIS role installed. And now I can host my website. So these are the requirement. Plus, you'll be requiring public IP so that your users can reach to that website over the internet. Okay. Plus, what if this particular server goes down? My website is down and my user won't be able to access that website. So scalable compute resource in the sense you will be having multiple servers, so that in case if one of the server goes down, you still have another server to host to respond to the request from the users. So that is the meaning of scalable compute resource. So you have on-demand scalable compute resource. So if you're hosting your website on-prem, this is not on-demand scalable. You'll have to go there and you'll have to configure a server, and then on top of that you'll have to make sure that operating system presents. On top of that you'll be having one of the web server role installed, and now your website is running. Okay. So this is the difference between cloud and on-prem. So if we are hosting it on-prem, scalable is not on demand. Okay. I'll have to make sure that I have that server in place, and then once the server is in place, I have deployed operating system. On top of operating system, we have that IIS role installed, and then my website is running. Okay. Uh, Virtual machine comes under infrastructure as a service model. So in that infrastructure as a service model, I am responsible for the operating system. So you are responsible for the license, you are responsible for the patching. So you have total control over update management of your operating system. So this is virtual machine. These are nothing but software computers. In Azure, we can just provide the required details, and your virtual machine is ready. You can scale out or scale in that virtual machine, means you can change size whenever you want, or you can add additional uh, instances, additional nodes to your cluster. Okay. And total control in the sense you have control over operating system. I still don't have control over hardware because I'm hosting this server, this virtual machine in a cloud. So I don't have control over that hardware. But yes, I can control the operating system. If I want Windows platform, I can use Windows platform. If I want Linux platform, I can use Linux platform. Yeah. So that is virtual machine. And before you deploy a virtual machine, you need to plan properly. So what we should plan before deploying a virtual machine? So what do you need to plan? You need to make sure you need to plan on which physical location we will be deploying our virtual machine. So there are multiple regions available in Azure. Azure is located across the globe, has its presence across the globe. So one of the region is West India. In India, we have three regions: Central India and South India. So you'll have to plan before deploying the virtual machine. The first thing you need to plan is the region. Where do you want your virtual machine to be physically present, physically located? Okay. Next, you need to plan the virtual network. Okay. So in network, we saw in last week I had this session on virtual network, and I told you how you can deploy a virtual, how you can create a virtual network, and while you are creating a virtual network, you need to decide the address space. So that you should plan before deploying. Okay. So whatever virtual network whatever address space you are planning, so you need to you need to plan that, so that in future if my requirement is as of many virtual machines, my address space should uh, allocate those virtual machine. Okay, should be able to means I should be able to have an IP address for that virtual machine. So that we need to plan about virtual network. Okay. After virtual network, you need to make sure you are following a naming convention. Okay. So naming convention in the sense how what would you like your VM to call? So let's say uh, you can use these things. These are provided by Microsoft. Like for example, choose the environment first. So here I have given an example. So what environment means what workload this virtual machine will be hosting. So in my case, I have, let's say, given prod. So this will be a production virtual machine. Okay. Then you can have it on the basis of location. So in the example, I've given it West India. Okay. After that instance, the number of instance. So we will be deploying a server, a cluster of server. So what is the number for this particular node in that cluster? So here we have given the number, and here we have given the role. So you have to decide your naming convention. So whatever organizations you're working in, you'll be deciding the naming convention, and according to the naming convention, you will be naming your virtual machines, your resources, whatever resources you're using in Azure. So that's up to you. So the first thing you need to plan is network. Second thing you need to plan is the naming convention. So in our demo, when I'll be deploying a virtual machine, I'll be using a simple naming convention, that is, so if I'm giving a demo of VM, so I'll be having a name as VM demo, and then the type of resource, that is virtual machine, and then the number of virtual machine. Okay. So if I'm creating a resource group for this VM, I'll be naming that resource group as VM demo resource group. This is the type of resource, and then the number of resource group. So it's the one resource group for this particular demo. So this is the naming convention I am following. You can follow any naming convention as so that you can understand uh, what this virtual machine is, what service this virtual machine is providing. So if you are creating a web server, you can provide this kinds of thing, this kinds of naming convention, prod when for West India or any other location you whatever location you want to give. Okay. So if I'm deploying it in Central India, I'll be using this name CIN. Or if I'm deploying it any other region like Southeast Asia, so I can use Southeast Asia. And then if it's a web server, so I'll give it a name web and then the number in that server farm. Okay. So you can use any naming convention that your company is following so that you can see, or if you want to add the platform, you can add the platform as well. Okay. Like Windows, Linux, so that you can do. Okay. So this is just the naming convention. How, what name do you want your virtual machine to have? So next, Azure has number of VM sizes. So according to your workload, you'll have to choose one of them, right? So general purpose, mostly we use for testing purposes or development purposes. Okay. Compute optimize, where we'll be getting high CPU. Okay. So if you have any application that requires more CPU power, so you'll have to use compute optimized. After memory, after compute optimized, we have memory optimized. Okay, so if your application that you'll be hosting on that virtual machine requires more memory, you can use memory optimized. Similarly, storage optimized, GPU, if you are hosting like SAP HANA or something, so you will be requiring more GPU. Or if you are hosting video services or something, okay, or if you are providing those virtual machines to your editing team, video editor or something, so those guys will require more GPUs. So for that reason, I'll be using the GPU optimized. Okay. Similarly, the last size we have is high performance computer. So if I just quickly switch back, quickly navigate to my uh, portal, you can see over here that if I go to my virtual machine, and here if I try to create a virtual machine, I have number of sizes available. So if I click over here, uh, see all sizes, you can see that these are the different size we have. So according to your workload, you will be choosing the size. Okay, that depends on your workload, what you want to host on this virtual machine. Okay, so this is the thing. So you can choose accordingly whatever your requirement is. Soumya, if he has registered, he might have got an email. Ask him to join from there. I cannot add him from here. Or just share the link with him. I'm sharing the link over chat. You just give him.
Okay. Because he called me, so asked me to add you.
Hmm. Yeah, I posted the link.
Okay. I will ask him to. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so these are the sizes. So let's say if my requirement is having a 4 gigabit of RAM and two virtual CPUs, so I can search for that. You can search for that from the filter. You can add the filter. Right now we have all types of memory available. Okay, so if you just want 4 gigabit of memory, you can filter that and you can see the available sizes. So these are the different sizes available. You'll have to choose according to your workload. For our demo purpose, I'll be choosing one of the B series and I'll be using B2S that will provide me 4 gigabit of RAM and two virtual CPUs. And if you'll just scroll on the right hand side, you'll get the estimated cost per month. So if this virtual machine keeps on running for 24/7, I'll be getting around this cost in Indian rupees, 2,187. Okay. So that's the good thing by Azure. So if I go for any other virtual machine size, the cost will be different. And one more thing, cost is based on your location, what region you are choosing. So different region will the cost will vary according to the region. Okay. So that is about virtual machine sizes. So different sizes are available. You'll have to see the workload, and according to the workload, you'll have to select the virtual machine. So while planning, you need to keep this in mind that you have to decide the size. What size of virtual machine do you want, and what workload this virtual machine will be having. Okay. Now there are different pricing model available for virtual machine. You have pay as you go model, plus you have a reserved model. Pay as you go in the sense, let's say I have deployed that B2S virtual machine. Okay, we saw that approximate cost will be around 2000 something. Okay, approximate cost will be 2000. So if I'm going for B2S, and if I keep this virtual machine on for 24/7, I will be Azure will charge me around 2000. Okay, so that is the pay as you go model. So I'm using it for 1 month. I'll have to pay this much. Let's say next month I don't require this machine, so I'll keep this machine deallocated, means in the stop, I'll shut down that virtual machine. I don't need, I'm not using that virtual machine. So for that particular particular month, Azure won't charge me. Okay. For that virtual machine resources, Azure won't charge me. So this is the pay as you go model. It's like your auto rickshaw, right? So if you're using, means if you're hiring an auto and you're traveling for 1 kilometer, you'll have to pay accordingly. If you're traveling for 2 kilometer, you'll have to pay accordingly. Similarly, if you're deploying a virtual machine, and if I'm using it for a month and it's running 24/7, I'll have to pay this much. Let's say I'm running it alternative days, so I'll have to pay approximately the half of that. So I'm just running that virtual machine 15 days a month, so I'll have to pay this much of amount. So that is pay as you go model. So pay only that much that you're consuming. Okay. Reserved means, let's say you are sure that you will be using this virtual machine for, let's say, 1 year at least. So you can reserve that virtual machine, and you will have approximately 40 to 60% of discount from this price. So if this virtual machine is costing me 2000 in pay as you go model, and let's say I reserve that particular virtual machine for at least 1 year, uh, that charge will be discounted and I'll be getting around 40 to 60%. Okay. So if I just go to the portal and search for virtual machine prices, pricing Azure, here you can see the approximate cost, the estimated cost for your workload. Okay. Just a second. People are asking for the link. I don't know if they have registered or not. Okay. So this is the pricing table. Pricing table, let's say if I'm going for B1S, and if I'm using pay as you go model, I'll have to pay this much of amount per hour. Okay. Now, if you're reserving it for, let's say, 1 year, then the price is almost half of what you're paying in pay as you go model. So we are getting around 41% saving. Similarly, if you're reserving the same virtual machine for 3 years, uh, the the rate is 1/3 of what you're paying over here in the pay as you go model. Okay. So if you are sure that you will be using this machine for at least 1 year, go for the reserved model, reserved pricing model. Or if you're sure if you're using it for more than 3 years or at least 3 years, go for the 3-year reserve model. So you'll be saving a lot of money. Okay. So these are the two models. These are the two pricing models we have for virtual machine. We have a pay as you go model where you'll be paying only what you're consuming, and we have a reserved model where you will be reserving the virtual machine for at least 1 year, and there you'll be getting around 40% off. And similarly, if you're reserving it for 3 years, you'll be getting around 60% of discount, or 60% less price than the pay as you go model. Okay. So this is the thing. You have a pay as you go model as well as reserved model. Yes, Abhay, what's up? Tell me.
Hey, Imran, so I just pinged you on the chat. If you could
Mhm.
send, we are recording the session, so if you could send me the recording on the WhatsApp, that would be great.
Okay, I'll send it till, once we have completed this training. Okay.
Sure, sure. No problem. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so let's carry on. Now, how about virtual machine storage? So if you're creating a virtual, or if you're creating a physical virtual machine, we require a hard disk, right? So if I want a laptop and I want to store some data, I require hard disk. Similarly, if I have a laptop and that laptop hosts a operating system, that operating system is also stored in your hard disk. So what about virtual machine? So if you're deploying a virtual machine, that virtual machine will be getting an OS disk, operating system disk. So if you're using Windows or Linux, that doesn't matter if you're using Windows or Linux, both the virtual machines will be having an operating system disk which will hold your operating system. Okay. Similarly, every virtual machine will have a temporary disk. So you shouldn't be storing data on temporary disk. Azure will provide you the temporary disk, but you shouldn't be storing the data on the temporary disk, because if you're restarting the virtual machine, your data will be lost. Okay. So it is just there so you can use it for paging file or logs for something. Okay. Uh, and if you're not frequently restarting your virtual machine, so you can use it for temporary basis. So that is attached to your virtual machine. So you'll be getting two
So
disks.
sorry to interrupt. So OS
Mhm.
disk is the C drive, I think, right? On
Yeah,
any.
C drive, correct. For
Okay,
Windows, it is C drive, and for Linux, it is the root drive.
correct.
Okay, and temporary disk will be the D drive, the next available drive. And if you want to store data in that virtual machine, you'll need to add a disk. That will be your managed or unmanaged disk. That's up to you. Okay. So what is managed and unmanaged disk? So managed disk means it is managed by Azure. So it is stored in Azure's storage and it is managed by Azure. Unmanaged means you are managing that disk. So let's say you have some VHDs or something, and you are onboarding those VHDs to your storage account in Azure. And from there, I can attach those disks to my virtual machine. But I'm responsible for those disks. I'll have to make sure that there's proper connectivity between the storage account and that disk wherever you have stored that particular virtual hard disk. Okay. So this is the old way of having a data disk. Recommended way is manage disk. So I'll just go to Azure and search for disk and create a disk. So the physical responsibility of that disk is with Azure. Here I'm responsible for everything. Okay. Here Azure will manage those disks. You can just add those disks to your virtual machine, and you can use it. You can keep your data. Okay. So this is the storage. So when you're planning, first thing you need to plan is network. You need to decide the network range that you will be using. Next thing, you need to make sure that you have a proper naming convention for your virtual machine. After that, there are two pricing models to choose from: pay as you go model or reserved model. So if you are sure that you'll be using that virtual machine for at least 1 year or 3 years, go for the reserved model. And if you're just doing it for development or testing purpose, let's say I'm right for like today, I'll be doing it for demo purpose. So I'll be using the pay as you go model. Okay. Similarly, next you need to decide the storage. So if you want a data disk, you can add a data disk, and we will be using the newer way, that is Azure managed disk. So Azure will be managing those disks. And once we have virtual machine in place, we can log in and check that there are two disks already attached. One is OS disk, one is temporary disk. Yeah. So in this demo, I'll be creating a virtual machine. So we'll start with deploying a Windows virtual machine, and then I'll deploy a Linux virtual machine. And we'll see. I am not good with the Linux, so I'll just deploy and show you the demo how you can get access of that Linux virtual machine. I'll be deploying a Windows virtual machine. Okay, and that Windows virtual machine will install IIS role, and let's see how our website works. Okay, so when you are deploying a virtual machine, we have seen what we should have, what we should plan for before deploying the virtual machine. So we need to plan for the network. So what I'll be using this subnet range, this network range, net address space 172.16.0.0. After that, we have to decide a naming convention. So I'll be using this naming convention. So this is my chapter, this is my topic, this is my module, virtual machine. After that, I'm giving a demo. I'm not deploying it for production or you can use test or something. Okay. And then what resource I'm deploying? So I'm deploying a resource virtual machine, and then I can give it the number. Similarly, when I'll be deploying a Linux virtual machine, I'll name it VM demo VM02. So this is our virtual machine number 1. This is our virtual machine number 2. After naming convention, I'll be using the pricing tier. That is my pay-as-you-go model. So I'll be using pay-as-you-go model. I'm not using the reserved model. Okay. After pricing, we will look into the storage, and in storage, will be having one OS disk and a temporary disk. Plus, I'll show you how you can attach a data disk to your to your virtual machines. Okay, so let's start with the demo. So first, I'll be creating a resource group with the name VM demo RG01. So this will be my resource group, which will host all these resources. So your virtual machines will be held in a resource group. So let's start with the deployment. And one more thing, you can use Portal to deploy virtual machines. You can use PowerShell. You can also use Azure CLI, Azure command line interface, to deploy virtual machines. So there are different ways to deploy the virtual machines. Okay. Also, you can use something called as ARM template. So we will be using over here the portal method. So that in that method, you'll be uh, doing this graphically. Okay, so you'll be deploying virtual machines graphically, so you'll understand what is happening over there. So let's go through the deployment, go through the steps. So first, I'll be creating a resource group. So I'll go to the portal. Just need to hit to portal.azure.com, and there you can search for virtual machine or resource group. If you're creating a resource group, you'll just search for resource groups. So resource group is nothing but the logical container which will contain all your resources. So when you're deploying a virtual machine, with the virtual machine, there will be virtual network, there will be a network interface card, there will be a public IP for your virtual machine. So all those resources will be placed in a resource group. So at the end of the demo, if I delete this resource group, all the resources will be deleted. So it won't incur charges for me. So this is good for the testing environment. So if you're just testing something, put all the resources in a one resource group for that particular testing, and delete the resource group, so all the resources will be deleted, so it won't incur charges. Okay. So let's create a resource group and just search for the resource group in the search bar and create one. Okay. So just give it a name. This is the naming convention I'm using, my module name, and this is just the testing. So this is just a demo. And this is the resource type, resource group, and the number of that resource group. And you'll have to provide the physical location where the region where your resource group will be stored. The metadata for the resource group will be placed. Okay. Now you can click on review and create, and your resource group will be ready. So this is my resource group tab. If I just search for that VM demo RG01, so this is my resource group. And at present, there's no resource in this resource group. You can click on create resources and you can deploy the resources. Okay, so I'm not deploying a resource from here. Let's create a virtual network now. So what we have decided, now this network will be having 172.16.0.0/16 range. So let's deploy a virtual network. So I'll just search for virtual network. let's select the same resource group that we created in the last step. This is VM demo RG01. After that, let's name this virtual network. So what I'll be naming, this is my naming convention. So I'm using VM demo VNet01, and this is the region. Okay. In next tab, you have to decide the IP address range. So what IP address range we have decided, that is 172.16.0.0. Okay. So let's delete this one, or let's edit over here and give it a name 172.16.0.0/16. And you'll have to also add a sub network. So this is the larger subnet. I'll be dividing this subnet. This is the larger network address. This is the larger address space. So I'll be dividing this address space into multiple sub networks. So this is segmentation. So if you'll see the last video or last session, you'll understand how do you create a virtual network and what all these are. Let's click on add subnet and let's give it a name. Whatever name you want to give, you can give the name to that subnet. So I'll be using 172.16.0.0/24. It's part of that. It's a subset of this address space. And let's click on add. So I have one subnet. Next, I don't need anything, security tags or review or create. I'll just click on review and create, and it will create a virtual network for me. Once you have the virtual network in place, now we'll move on to deploy our first VM, that is our Windows VM, VM number 1. Okay. Now, while creating the VM, network interface card will be created uh, while creating the VM. So I'm not creating that separately. It will be created while creating the VM. Okay. So let's go to the portal. Now our network is also ready. You can click on go to resource and you can see the address spaces that we have used 172.16.0.0, right? And you can click on subnets and here you can see your subnet. And this is the address space we have in the subnet. Next, let's search for virtual machine and create one virtual machine. So I'll just click on create and select the virtual machine option from there. And now first thing it is asking as a resource group. So I'll just click on I'll just select the same resource group that we created, that is VM demo RG01. Here you have to provide a name for that virtual machine. This is the region. I don't want any availability option. In next topic will be covering these availability options. So right now I don't want any availability options. Security type, this is something new feature that is added by Microsoft Azure. So you can click from the security over here. So I'll go with the standard. This only supports the generation 2 virtual machines. Okay, so I'll be choosing the generation 1 virtual machine. So I don't need that security. I'll just click the standard one, the default one that we are getting over here, and I'll select Windows Server 2019 Data Center Generation 1. Okay. Next, you have to define a size. What size do you want? So I'll go with B2S. That will give me 4 gigabit of memory, 4 gigabit of RAM, and 2 virtual CPUs. Okay. Now you can also select Azure Spot instance. This will again cost you less. Okay. But in this option, Azure can take the virtual machine back from you if Azure requires that particular resource. So this is the Spot instance. This is the means if I'm not using the Spot instance, I'll have to pay 2,776 per month. Okay. If you're using Spot instance, the cost will be reduced. But the drawback is whenever Azure wants, this virtual machine can be deallocated and it can Azure can provide that virtual machine to uh, provide that resource to other customer. So if I just select on a Spot instance, you can see there are two more options. What will be the eviction type? Means let's say if some other customer requires the resource, then at that time, what do you want? Do you want means it will evict. Azure will deallocate your resource because it is a Spot instance. Okay. So you have to choose one of the options. What do you want? You want virtual machine to be evicted, and you'll have to choose a maximum price. So at what price do you want this to be evicted? Means let's say if someone is paying, it's like bidding system. If someone is paying more than you, your resource will be evicted. Okay. And what policy do you want? If let's say, do you want to deallocate this virtual machine, or do you want to completely delete this virtual machine? Deallocate is just like shutdown. So that virtual machine will be shut down if someone is giving more price than me. Okay. So that you can see over here, you can select from here. So I'm not using the spot instance. If if you're doing it for testing or something, you can use spot instance, but don't do that for production. Okay. Now this is the local admin account. So when you will be connecting to your VM, you'll have to provide this username and password. So I'll just give a simple name as your user and a password. Okay. And these are the allowed port. So if you're using Windows VM, how will you be connect? How you will connect to that VM? You will be taking the console of that VM? So for that, I need to keep the RDP port open, and then I can connect to that VM. So I'm keeping port 3389, and let's say if this is a web server, uh, I'll need to keep port 80 open, so this machine will listen on port 80, and we can reach to that virtual machine over the internet over port 80. So I'm keeping this two port open, port number 80 and port number 3389. In the next section, this is the OS disk. So what disks do you want? Do you want a premium solid state drive, a standard solid state drive, or a standard hard disk drive? So premium will give you a fast performance, a good performance. Standard SSD will also give you a good performance, but not better than a premium SSD. And standard HDD is our magnetic disk drive that nobody uses these days. Okay, but if you don't if that is your requirement, that you don't want a good performance or something, this is just for testing purpose, and you want to save some bugs, you can go for standard HDD. Okay, so in our case, I'll go for premium SSD, and this is the encryption time. So you encryption type. So now we are keeping our data in Azure. So how do you make sure about the security? So whatever data you're keeping in your disk, that disk will be encrypted. So if physically someone goes to that solid state drive and see, you won't be able to see what the data is there in that drive. So that will be decrypted only when that is connected to your VM. Okay. So Azure is encrypting that for us. So that will be encrypted. You can encrypt it with your own key as well. I'm using the platform managed key, so Azure will manage the keys and all. So this is the C drive. Now, if you want additional drives, you can have a data disk attached from here. You can create and attach a new disk over here. And if you already have an existing disk, you can attach that existing disk from here. Okay. Next is the networking section. How will you connect? Means how will you reach to your VM? So this is the virtual network that we created in the last step. First, we created the resource group. After that, we created the virtual network. So this is the same virtual network, which is by default selected. So if you want this virtual machine to be part of another VNet, you can select that VNet as well. So I'll go for VM demo VNet 01 that we created. And this is the subnet I want this virtual machine to be part of. And this virtual machine will be having a public IP address so that we can reach to this virtual machine over the internet. So we can take that console. And this is the network security group. We haven't covered the security group yet. We have already covered the networking section, but in next section, we will be looking into network security if we complete the virtual machine today. Okay. So in the next section, we'll be looking into network security group. So right now, we'll just ignore it, and I'll keep it as a basic. Okay. Here also you have that option of opening the port so that you can reach to your virtual machine. If you want this virtual machine to be placed behind a load balancer, you can create a load balancer over here, or if you already have a load balancer, you can click and you can provide the name of that load balancer. So right now we haven't seen the load balancing and all. So let's not check this box. In the management section, you have the boot diagnostics. So whether VM is stuck while booting or something. So if you want those logs, you can click on enable with a storage account. So once Azure will send all the logs to a storage account. I don't want this boot diagnostic right now, so I'm just keeping it as a disable. Now, if you want your virtual machine, and if you want to log into your virtual machine using Azure Active Directory, so you can enable this as well. Okay. Now to save cost, I will recommend to have this enable auto shutdown. So at this particular time, this machine will be auto shutdown. So if let's say you are testing the thing and you have forgotten to delete the virtual machine, so Azure will make sure that at particular time this will be shut down. Okay. So you can select the time zone, whatever time zone you want, and you can also send the notification before, means you'll receive an email before this virtual machine is shut down. So for our demo, I don't want this. Next, you can enable the backup, so it will be backed up, but you will be requiring recovery services vault and backup policies. So we are not going into that right now. Okay, so I'm only showing what is required from for just configuring a simple Windows VM. Okay. Next, in advance, we can provide a script so that it will be while deploying the virtual machine, that script will run. So let's say I want to have something automated, and while deploying the virtual machine I want this to be a web server. So I'll just provide a PowerShell script, and while deploying the virtual machine, Azure will make sure that that particular role is available. Okay. Or if I want this to be a domain controller, I'll just add those scripts and I'll pass on that script to that virtual machine, and Azure will deploy that for me. Okay. So then in advanced section, we can provide those script and all. Right now, we are not providing any script. Okay. Next, review and create, and click on create. So it will take around less than 5 minutes, and your server will be ready. And then you can connect to that server. Okay. So it will cost me around 4 rupees per hour. So if I keep this on for at least 1 hour, it will charge me 4 rupees. Okay. Once it goes to the deployment screen, now let's deploy second VM, that is our Linux VM. Okay, so it will take around 2 minutes. And for our second VM, we will keep that VM in the same network. And instead of Windows, we'll be using Linux this time. Pricing tier is same, pay as you go. And I don't know the Linux command to check the disks and all. So I'll just keep that default. I'll just show you how you can connect to a Linux VM. Okay. So it's deployed. Now let's go to the virtual machine again and create a Linux virtual machine. Let's click on create, select virtual machine, select the resource group that we created. Now name this virtual machine, region, no availability options as of now. Instead of Windows Server 2019, I'll go for Ubuntu Server. This is one distribution of Linux. And I don't want to be virtual CPUs on 4 gigabit of memory for this Linux VM. So I'll go for 1 gigabit of memory. And in Linux, while we deployed the Windows, we had only one authentication type, that was the password. Now here we have two different types. One is public key. So you will be having that public key, and while logging into that VM, you'll need to provide this public key. Every time you try to log in, you'll need to provide that public key so that you can securely connect to your Linux VM. Or in Azure, we also have that password option, so we can use username and password instead of public key. Okay, so SSH public key is secured way to connect to your virtual machine. Whoever is having the public key, that particular user can only log into that virtual machine. And password, whoever gets the username and password can log in. Okay, so public is just nothing but a SSH file that will be downloaded while creating the virtual machine. Okay. So I'm using password for simplicity over here, and I'll give it the same name as your user. And Linux required a secure shell to connect. So I'm keeping SSH 22 open. And if you're creating this as an Apache, if you're installing Apache or Nginx over it, you can keep port 80 open. So I'm just keeping port 22 open. Rest of the options are same: disks, networking, management, advanced tags, and review and create. So I'll go quickly from this. So in networking, make sure that you have selected the network and the subnet that you want this virtual machine to be part of. This virtual machine will have another public IP. So we are deploying two different public IPs. One is for our Windows VM and another one is for our Linux VM. In management, I'll just untick the auto shutdown, and let's click on next, tags, review and create, and let's click on create. So it will deploy one VM for us, that is that will be having a Linux virtual machine, Ubuntu distribution. And it will cost me around 1 rupees, 1 rupee an hour. So let's click on create. Okay, so while this is being deployed, we already have one virtual machine in place, that is our Windows VM. So if you click on the notification tab, you can see all the deployment that have been succeeded, or the deployment that are in progress. So I'll just click on go to resource. This is our VM deployment. Okay, you can see this from here. So I'll click on go to resource and it will take me to the VM page. Okay, so this is my VM management page from where I can manage the VM. Yeah. So this is VM demo VM01. This is our Windows VM. You can see over here what operating system this VM has. You can also see over the size. So it has a standard B2S. Similarly, you can see the public IP, the virtual network and subnet, and we have not configured the DNS. So DNS is not configured. And if you'll scroll down, you'll see all the details regarding this virtual machine. Whatever details we have provided while deploying the virtual machine. So all those details you can see over here. And to connect this virtual machine, I'll just copy the public IP address and I'll press Windows and R key. So it will open a run dialog box for me. Here I'll just I'll just type mstsc and I'll connect to that virtual machine by providing the public IP. And if you click on connect, it will ask you the username and password. Okay, so we have that username that we provided and the password that I gave while deploying the virtual machine. Now you are connected to your virtual machine. Okay, so this is the console. Now I can manage. I can do whatever I want. I can install whatever I want to install, and this will act as a server. Okay, now let's say you want to deploy. You want this to be a web server, so it will be hosting a web application for you, a website for you. And when you hit this server over the internet, that website should be displayed. Okay, so that whatever you want to do, you can do with this now server. So this belongs to you now. This public IP is also yours now. So if you're not stopping this virtual machine, this public IP is yours. You can use this public IP. Okay, but you cannot take this public IP to home. You'll just this public IP will be assigned to this VM only. Okay, so now let's install a web server role onto this VM. So this is a Windows VM who means if you're well versed with Windows, you know that to convert this virtual machine or a to convert this server to a web server, you'll just need to add one role, that is IIS role. So I'll just go to add roles and features. I'll click on next, next, and from here I'll select web server and just click on next, 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 and install. So it will install the web server role, and this server will respond to port 80 now. Okay. Before that, let me show you, as discussed in the theory, this virtual machine will be having two disks. One is your operating system disk, other is a temporary storage disk. Okay, so this is just the temporary disk that will be provided with with every virtual machine. Okay, so if I'll click on this, double click on this temporary disk, you can see there's already a warning. So this is a temporary disk. Any data stored in on this drive is subject to loss, and there's no way to recover this. So if you're restarting or doing something, your data will be lost. So don't store anything over here. Okay. So if I'll be adding any directory or any text file or anything, any data to this particular disk, and if I restart the virtual machine, or if you're doing patching and then restarting a virtual machine, that data will be lost. So don't keep any data over here. So this is just so that you're using it for temporary purpose, not using it for any storage or something. Okay, and this is where our operating system files are present in C drive. So if you want to attach any disk, you'll need to attach the disk from the Azure portal. Okay, so if you go into your virtual machine section, there under settings section, we have that option of disks. From here, I can see that that disk, the OS disk is added. Okay, it has 127 gigabit. So if I just go back to my virtual machine and to confirm that, you can see over here we have almost 127 gigabit. Okay. So if you want to add additional disks, you can just click on create and attach a new disk. From here, you can create and attach a new disk, or if you have an existing disk, you can attach the disk from here. So we'll attach an existing disk. So for creating a disk, what I'll need to do, I'll need to search for disks, and I'll click on disks, and I'll create a one. I'll keep this in the same resource group, and let's give it a simple name, disk 01 Southeast Asia. And instead of 1 TB size, I'll just change that size. So I'll change it to, let's say, 16 GB or 8 GB. Okay, just click on review and create, and your disk will be ready. So right now we have just created a disk. We haven't attached it to the VM. Okay. So let's wait for the deployment. Now it's deployed. Now we can attach this to a VM. Right now, if you see, the disk state is unattached. Okay. So to attach this disk to a VM, I'll now go to the virtual machine and the VM demo VM01 that we created. And under the disk section, I'll just click on attach existing disks, and I'll select that disk. So right now it's not showing, just give it some time. You'll see that disk. Okay. So we'll wait for some time, and right now you can see that over here we have that disk 01. Okay. So now I am attaching this disk. So I've given the disk, and just click on save. So it's simple, like you have an external disk and you're attaching it to your laptop. So it's the same thing over here. So this is the virtual disk, and now I have attached it to my VM. So now if I go to the VM, you should see that disk. Okay, but to see that disk over here, you'll need to create a drive. You'll need to format that disk so that the file system can read that disk. Okay, so if I just in Windows, we can use disk management to format the disk. Okay, so you can see over here that disk 1 8 GB is present over here, and it's now not initialized. So once I initialize this disk, you should see that disk over here in Explorer. Okay. So let's click on initialize, and let's format this disk so our file system can read this disk. And let's create a volume. Okay, now if I go to Explorer, you should see the new volume is present. Okay, this is the same volume FF. So I've just added one disk. Now you can store your data over here. Instead of storing your data to the temporary storage, you can store your data over here. Okay, now if I just see, we should have, see, installation is succeeded. So our web server is up and running now. Okay, now if I hit this IP, so if I go to VM overview page, there we have a public IP. So if I click on that IP, if I copy that IP and paste it over here, now that is responding, means our web server is up and running. Okay. Now I have uh, a basic website, basic HTML website that I can add over there, and now that should respond to this thing. Okay, or what we can do now, what is this responding? If I go to Windows C, means C drive, and if I click on inetpub, and if I click on www.root, so this is responding to this particular image. Okay, so if I just double click, you can see this is the image uh, which we saw over there. So if I just copy the IP and paste again, this is the same image. So it's just acting as a basic website. So you can see that this is the same image. So if I just change something for in this image to make sure that our server, our website is running, and if I go back to the page, now this is in my cache. So I'll just copy and I'll open a new in private window, and there I'll just paste, and you can see over here. So that is responding. Whatever changes you'll do in your website, that will be the live changes, and you can have your website up and running. Okay, so this is that simple. So if you have an idea, you have a code already, you can create a web server and your website is up and running now. Okay, so in this way we can deploy virtual machines. Now we have deployed one more virtual machine, that is our Linux virtual machine, that is VM demo VM02. So if I click on that virtual machine also has a different private IP. Yes, Sayed?
How many website we can create?
That depends. Means you can create number of website. We have IIS install. If you're well versed with IIS, you
Okay.
can create number of websites. But your virtual machine is only having 4 gigabit of RAM, so you'll need to
Hmm.
make sure about that workload. So if you
Oh,
are
okay.
deploying number of virtual machines, then you need to increase the size then.
Hmm. Okay.
Okay. So this is our Linux VM. So to connect to Linux VM, RDP won't work. So if you want to connect to a Linux VM, you need to make sure that you have a SSH client. Okay. So either you can use putty or you can use any terminal. Uh, I'll be using a PowerShell. So this is my Windows terminal, and I'm using this terminal to connect to the Linux VM. Okay. Now to connect to Linux VM, you need a public IP of that VM, and you just need to give a simple command. So if you click over here in connect and click on SSH, you will see the command over here. Okay. So if you have used that public key and private key concept, so you'll have to provide all these things. The key path where you have stored a public key, and that key path you'll have to provide. Okay. If I'm just connecting this VM without a public key, I'll just give this simple command SSH and then my username and then the IP address of that VM. And if I click on enter, you need to provide a password. And once you have provided correct password, now you're on to your VM. You can see over here. Okay. Now PowerShell session has a PS in front of it, and you are on a Linux shell. can see over here that the shell is different. So now I'm on my VM demo VM02. So this is my VM02. So whatever command we have for VM, you can use that command and you can install your web server. Okay. So I don't know what the command is. So I guess you just need to use this command, but I'm not sure. So if I want to install, let's say Nginx web server, so it couldn't find the file or something. Whatever command we have for Linux, like we installed IIS in Windows. Similarly, we need to install Nginx Apache or something in Linux, and our web server will be running. Okay, so that command work, but I'm not sure if we can hit it over internet or not. So it is just installing your web server role. That's all. Okay, and this will again host your website. Okay, so if I just do a list of all the websites, there you can we don't have any Nginx folder available over here. So if I just try and hit on the public IP, if I click on public IP, copy the public IP over here, and if I click, we did not keep the port 80 open, so that you need to open at the NSG level. So we haven't covered the NSG yet, but I'll just show you how you can keep port 80 open. So right now port 80 is not open, and that is listening on port 80. So you need to enable that over here. You need to add one rule that will say that port 80 should be allowed so that your VM will respond on port 80. Right now it's not responding. Okay. So if I just add one rule from here, so you can add a rule from here, add inbound port rule, and they just give a name and click on HTTP, so it will allow port 80. Okay. And once we have added that port, hit on that public IP again, and you should see that your Nginx web server is up and running. And now you can take the code from your developer and add that code to your Linux web server or Windows web server, and your website will be up and running. Okay. So it is now added. If I'll just refresh, you should see port 80 is now added. So if port 80 is added, and if I refresh it, in some time it should respond and your Nginx server is up and running. Okay. So this is how your website will be up and running in few clicks, and you can, instead of deploying it on-prem, we can have we can deploy it in any cloud service like Azure, and our website will be up and running. So that is Azure Compute Service. Okay. Now what we have done, we have deployed just one VM, and that VM is hosting a website. Now what if this VM goes down? Okay. So now if you'll see, I have that public IP copied, and if I paste, our website is showing. Okay. Now if this VM goes down or something happens in the back end, let's say Azure data center, which is in Southeast Asia, is experiencing a network connectivity issue or something, or your server is not, this VM where on which host this VM is hosted is not responding, or something has happened to that hardware server where you have deployed this VM. Okay. So in that case, your website will be down. Okay. So if I click on stop, my virtual machine will be stopped and my website won't be responding. So consider this as your there's a connectivity issue to your data center where you have deployed this, or the physical host is down where we have deployed this virtual machine, or is something you're doing patching or something. Okay, so that virtual machine is now rebooting and your website is down. So in this scenario, we cannot be dependent on one server. So you should be having more than one server so that uh, your website won't means it won't affect your website. Okay. If you'll see it's just responding and my website is not responding. just requesting, but my website is not responding because web server is now down. Okay. So in that case, what we will do, we'll create a cluster, obviously, and on top of that cluster, we'll deploy our virtual machine. So next topic is about high availability. So let's understand the availability first. So availability is nothing but the ability to keep the services up and running. So no matter what is happening, your services should be running. Take the example of Netflix and Amazon Prime from last year. Last year, we were dealing with this pandemic, and for entertainment purpose, we only had Netflix, Amazon, Hotstar, all these things, right? So they need to make sure that their services were up and running. So if you have consumers and you're providing some services, you as an admin, you as a developer, you as the organization, as a service provider, you need to make sure that your services are up and running because customers are paying you, and you are getting salary, you're getting your bread and butter from customer. So you need to provide good service. So if you're using internet for providing services and you're using website for providing services, that website is hosted somewhere in some server. So if you're using VM, that VM is also getting deployed somewhere in some physical host. So if that host, something happens to that physical host, my VM will be not responding, and the website that is hosting that the VM which is hosting that website won't respond. So in that case, we need to make sure that our services, whatever services we are providing as an organization or as a service provider, that should be highly available. So availability, high availability is nothing but the ability to keep services up and running for a long periods of time with very little downtime. Okay, so let's take this example. So let's say you host a means you have a coffee shop. In that coffee shop, you also have a server which is hosting your billing application and your website. So I have a billing application and a website hosted over my server. Now I'm taking internet orders, whatever orders we are getting on this server. I'm creating bills for my customer from this server. So there's a good amount of workload on this server. Okay. Now, one fine day, our marketing team decides to do the advertisement, and that advertisement is a big hit. So, regularly, I see this number of customers, but as soon as our marketing team does the advertisement, that's a big hit, and now I suddenly see a rise in the customer. So if you suddenly see the rise in customer, what will be happening? There will be more load on your server. You'll be having more orders. You'll be preparing more bills. You're getting some orders from website as well. So there's more load on this server. So what will happen to this server? The server will stop responding at some time. So this will hang and then it will stop responding. Okay. So you as an admin, what do you need to make sure that instead of giving all the workload to one server, you should be hosting your website or web services in multiple servers so that if one server is down, we still have two different servers so that our workload can be distributed. Okay, so that is our topic for today. That is availability, and in Azure, how will you achieve that availability, high availability? So we have deployed one VM and that is now down. So our website is not working. So what we can make sure, we can deploy our VMs on availability. So instead of one VM, you can have multiple VMs. But problem is, I don't know where my VM is getting deployed. So while deploying the VM, what did we provide? We provided a location. I provided this region, Southeast Asia. So it's hosted. My VM is hosted now in Singapore data center. Okay. But in Singapore also they have different availability zones. In Singapore, they have in Southeast Asia, they have three different availability zones. So there's one availability zone, there's another availability zone, there is third availability zone. Now let's say when you deployed the VM, you just provided the region, Southeast Asia. Now Azure will place this VM in either this data center or this. Let me give you the hierarchy. When you talk about Azure, Azure has its presence all over the world. So if we talk about India, in India, Azure has multiple data centers, and they have created regions like South India, Central India, and West India. Now in India, we don't have any availability zone. So this is the region. So India is the geography. South India, Central India, West India is the regions, are the regions. Okay. Now in that region, they might be having one data center or more than one data center, in order to make sure that if something happens to one data center, your data should be there, should be up and running. Okay. So let's say in West India, they have multiple availability zones. Now, availability zone is nothing but a collection of data centers, physical data centers. Now, these physical data centers are kept like, means they are in a close premise. Okay, so they are very close, and distance between this availability zone is around 150 to 200 kilometers. Okay. So when you are deploying a virtual machine, you're just selecting a region, West India. Now Azure can take this virtual machine and deploy this virtual machine into this zone, this AZ under this data center, or this AZ under this data center, or any AZ under that data center. So when I'm giving a virtual machine, when I'm giving the command to Azure to deploy a virtual machine, it will just take any data center and deploy a virtual machine over there. Now let's say you need high availability, so you'll just go to Azure portal and you create another virtual machine. And now I've created this virtual machine, and the first virtual machine, let's say, is deployed in this data center number 1. Second virtual machine, I'm not sure. It might be here, it might be here, or it might be here. So if that virtual machine is deployed over here, imagine the latency you will be having. So if you're creating a cluster, we need to make sure that there is less latency, and both my virtual machines should be able to communicate. So if there's in cluster, there will be heartbeat or something, right? So every 5 seconds or something, there should be back and forth messages so that they can see that your cluster is up, right? So in that scenario, I'm not sure where my machine is getting deployed. So to make sure your machines are deployed nearer to each other, closer to each other, what you need to do, you need to create availability sets. So availability sets are nothing but a logical thing which will make sure that your virtual machines are kept closer to each other, so that there is minimal latency. And if you're creating cluster out of it, they'll make sure that it is present. Okay. So we have Azure data centers, and in that data center, we will be having like racks, and in that rack, we'll be having hardware servers, right? And if you are deploying a virtual machine, that should be getting deployed into one of the server 1, server 2, server 3. So if you are deploying 3 virtual machines together, then let's say Azure has deployed that virtual machine. First virtual machine is placed in server 1, second virtual machine is placed in server 2, and third virtual machine is placed in server 3. Okay. Now, what if server 1 goes down, the hardware server where our virtual machine is hosted, server 1 goes down? You still have 2 instances of your virtual machine that is running. So if you have hosted a website and you've created cluster out of these 3 virtual machines, and you're hosting a website, your website is still running. But what if something happens to the rack? If rack goes down, if there's network connectivity issue, or entire rack is down due to some reason, all the servers are now not reachable. So your website is not running, right? So for this reason, we need availability set. It's just a logical thing which will deploy a group of related VMs, so that all those VMs that you're deploying in an availability set are not a single point of failure. Okay. In this scenario, we have a single point of failure over here. So if rack 1 goes down, our entire service is down. Okay. So you need to create availability set first, and availability set will make sure that your first VM is placed in one rack and one server. Your second VM is placed in different rack and different server. Similarly, if you are deploying third VM to that set, it will placed in different rack and different server, so that all your VMs are not part of a single point of failure. Okay. Now to understand availability set, there are two concepts to get, that is fault domain and update domain. So understand consider fault domain as your rack. Okay. So if something happens to this rack, my VM is down. So that is my fault domain. This is the first fault domain I have. Okay. Similarly, second rack will become your second fault domain. Third rack will become your third fault domain. Fourth rack will become the fourth fault domain. So while creating availability set, you have to decide how many numbers of fault domain you want your VMs to be deployed. So let's say if I select fault domain 2, so and I'm deploying two VMs, so one VM will be kept in one rack, second VM will be kept in second rack. Okay. So if you're deciding, if you're creating an availability set, you'll have to provide the fault domain number. So if you're giving fault domain, let's say 5, so and you're deploying 5 VMs, so first VM will be in the rack 1, second VM will be in rack 2, third VM will be in rack 3, fourth will be in rack 4, fifth will be in rack 5. So the number of fault domain will decide the distribution of your VMs. Okay. Now, if something is happening at the rack level, one VM is still running, right? If something happening at the rack level, one VM is still running. If something happens to this rack, this VM is still running. So from the rack perspective, we don't have a single point of failure right now. Okay, but still we have a single point of failure. What if happens something to this region where all this rack is present? There is a tornado or something, and this entire region is failed, you still have that failure. So in that case, we need to make sure we are spreading our VM across availability zones or across regions. Okay, so that you need to make sure while designing this thing, while architecturing these things. Okay, the next concept to understand about availability set is update domain. Now we have secured, sorry, we have secured our VM from the fault domains, from single point of failure. So if rack is failed, now we have distributed our VMs in different racks. So we are secured from that point of view. But what if Microsoft is doing the patching and these three racks are get patching together? So if they're patching the racks, and whatever hardware server your VM is in, and if they are patching these things, and let's say they are patching all the servers in this particular rack, so my VM is getting down, right? If they are patching this and this three racks together, all my VMs are in the three racks, so my VMs will be patched, the hardware server will be patched, so VM will be rebooted. So in that scenario, what we'll do, we with the fault domain, we also provide the update domain, the number of update domain. Okay, so if you have provided fault domain and update domain, now this is one update domain, this is another update domain. So Microsoft will make sure that they are patching only this hardware server, the first level of hardware servers. Okay, they're not patching the second one. So if you have selected two fault domain and two update domain, Microsoft will make sure that your machine is deployed in one fault domain, and second machine is deployed in second fault domain and second update domain, and different fault domain and different update domain. So they are not a single point of failure now. Okay, so fault domain you can consider as a rack, and update domain is just the logical thing where Microsoft will be patching one update domain at a time. So they won't patch every update domain at the same time, so that it won't hamper your services or it won't make any difference to your services. Okay, so if they're patching update domain 1, only this VM is affected, I still have my services running from this VM. Okay, so that we can achieve using fault domain and update domain. Now we'll come to scaling concept. Before that, I'll show you how you can use availability set and deploy your VMs. Now you need to create an availability sets before deploying your VM. So if here, if you'll see under settings, you have that option of availability and scaling. I'm not part of any fault domain, any update domain. I'm not part of any availability set. You cannot add this VM to availability set. While creating the VM, you need to decide that. Okay. So you can create availability set from just by searching that. So this is availability sets. I'll just click on it and I'll create a new availability set. Okay, we don't have one. So I'll create it and I'll place it in the same resource group. Let's name it VM demo A set 01. Region is Southeast Asia. Here you have to decide what is the number of fault domains you want and what are the number of update domain you want. Okay, so I'll go for 2 fault domain and 2 update domains, and that's all. Just click on review and create, and your availability set is ready. Okay, now when you create a VM, you'll have that option of providing an availability set. So if I'll just click on virtual machine, I'm not creating a one. I'm not creating one. I'll just show you. Or let's create 2 simple VMs, Linux VMs. So I'll place those VMs in the same resource group, VNet demo, and let's name it VM demo VM03. And here you have that option of availability set or availability zone. Okay. Availability zone will separate your VMs and it will place your VMs in different zones. Okay. Availability set will place your VMs in same region and same availability zone, but it will be placed in different racks and different fault domain and different update domain. Okay, so that it won't be a single point of failure. So I'll click availability set, and whatever we have, what availability set we have in place, we'll be using that. And let's create this using password. And let's allow port 22, and let's click on review and create. Now you cannot add a VM after creation. Okay, so you have to make sure while you are creating, you have that availability set in place, and you're using that and adding your VMs to an availability set. Now I'm getting this problem. Okay, so I'm not changing anything. It is just giving me this problem to re-verify the public IP every time. Let's deploy another Linux VM, and that will also be part of your this availability set. So I'll go to virtual machine and I'll click on create. Let's select the resource group. Okay, and to make sure that this is a part of availability set, you'll just click on availability options, click on availability set, and here click on that set. Okay, just click on review and create, and your VM will be created. The first VM is created. Now let's wait for the second VM to be deployed. till then we can go to the first VM that we deployed, VM03, and it's part of one availability set. So if I click on that VM, and here if you'll go to under settings section, if you click on availability plus scaling, you can see that it's now part of this availability set. So if I click on that availability set, you can see VM03 is part of one fault domain and one update domain. Similarly, VM demo VM04 is part of another fault domain, another update domain. So if something happens to this rack number 0, only this VM will be affected. If something happens to rack number 1, only this VM will be affected. But if something is happening to the regional level, my VM is down. To the zonal level, my all the VMs will be down. So in that case, you need to make sure that you're placing your VMs in different availability zone. But that again, the latency will come, and you need to make sure that some VMs are in the same data center, while some are there in the other data center only for the disaster recovery purposes. Okay. So in this way, you can design your compute options. And now we have two VMs that are part of one availability set. So they have been placed in different fault domain and different update domain. So now they are not part of a single point of failure. Now you can install whatever you want on these bus machines, and they'll be running. Okay. Now I'll just delete both these VMs. I don't need these VMs. So VM number 3 and number 4. Okay. Now, when you're deleting resource, you need to make sure that you are deleting all the resources that are not required. Now, if I just delete the VMs, only VM will be deleted. The associated disks, the virtual NIC won't be deleted. So you have to delete those things as well. Okay. So to delete those things, I'll have to go to the resource group level. And there, if I see, you can see over here and down, this is VM demo VM03. This is the public IP of VM. This is the network security group which is associated to this VM. This is the NIC card for which is attached to this VM. And this is the OS disk. So there are 5 resources that I need to delete if I don't need this VM. Otherwise, you will be incurring the charges because we are using that storage disk, and Azure will charge for that storage. So I'll need to make sure if I don't need a particular VM, I'm deleting all the associated resources. Okay. Similarly, I'll delete VM4 public IP for that VM, network security group that VM belongs to, the NIC that is attached to that VM, and the OS disk. Okay. So I'll just delete all these resources. I don't need those resources that were just for the demo purpose. And click on delete. So it will delete 10 resources, 5 for one VM and 5 for other VM. Okay. Now let's move on to the next topic, that is scaling. Now we have discussed that Azure has different size. Okay. All the size we saw in the portal. So what we have selected from the B series. Now B series is generally used for testing or development purposes. Now let's say you are testing something and you have used B series, and in that B series you have used, let's say, 4 gigabit of RAM and 2 virtual CPUs. Now you have deployed something, you have deployed Visual Studio Code, or you have deployed .NET framework, or JavaScript, something like that is required, or all these things you have deployed. Now you're thinking that 4 GB is too less for me. I want more RAM. So what are the options? So what you can do, you can delete this virtual machine and you can create another virtual machine with larger size that will give you 8 GB. So that is not the correct thing to do. So delete my VM and then recreate another VM and then reinstall all those things that is required for the developer or whatever your requirement is. So what should we do in that case? So in Azure, we have the option of increasing the size. So let's say initially you thought 4 GB would be okay, but as time passes, now you feel that 4 GB is very less for this particular workload. You need more RAM, 4 GB, 8 GB, or 16 GB of RAM. So in that case, you can increase the size. So that is nothing but the scaling concept. So you can scale up or scale out. Okay, you can scale up, scale down, or scale out, scale in. So that is the thing. Scale up means changing the size. So this is a scaling up your VM. So if I have something with B series and I want to change the change the series or change the size, you can do that. Okay. You can also scale down. Means let's say initially you deployed a larger VM with 16 GB, and now you feel 16 GB is a lot of memory for this particular VM. You can scale down and you can change the size. Okay. Similarly, you can scale out or scale in. Scale out, scale in is nothing but increasing the number of nodes. So initially I had only one node. Now let's say I want two nodes, so I can add those nodes. Now I want if three nodes, I can add extra node. Similarly, if I want to scale in, I can reduce the number of nodes. So depending on the workload, you can decide whether you want to scale up or scale down. And scale up means increasing the size, increasing the compute resources like RAM or CPU. So if I just want to increase the RAM and CPU, I'll be scaling up. If I want to decrease the RAM size, the memory or the CPU, I'll scale down. Okay. Similarly, if I want to add number of nodes or reduce number of nodes or subtract number of nodes, to add number of nodes, I'll be scaling out, and to reduce number of nodes, I'll be scaling in. Okay. So this is the scaling concept. Now, people prefers cloud because of this scalability. Okay. Now, what you can do, you can have a monitoring team and they can monitor the performance of your VMs. They can monitor the performance of your VMs, and then they can manually add extra node, or they can manually go and increase the size. Okay. Now in Azure or in any other cloud, we have that auto scale concept. Now, what is auto scale? If you have attended my introduction class, in that I have emphasized on this thing that cloud provides you auto scaling. So auto scaling means this will be done automatically. Let's say now I have deployed only one instance, and on that instance I am hosting some workload. Now let's say this is experiencing a high traffic, and now I want that should be changed to two VMs, and that should be done automatically. So if you have that in place, the scaling thing you have in place, that says, let's say if this particular VM reaches 75% of CPU or memory usage, just add extra node to that cluster. You can have that auto scale rules in place, and on your behalf, Azure will monitor the workload. And now if workload is high, if traffic is high, it will add extra uh, machine, it will add extra node to your skill set. Okay. So that is auto scale, means automatically it will be decided whether you need VMs, whether you need extra nodes or you don't need extra nodes. Okay, so that is a scaling concept. Now to achieve that, you need to make sure that you are using scale sets. Okay, so scale sets are nothing but a set of identical VMs. Now in availability set, what I have to do, I have to log into that virtual machine, and then I'll have to uh, configure this virtual machine separately, configure this virtual machine separately, and after that, if something is happening to this virtual machine, I'll have to add additional virtual machine, and then I'll have to configure that virtual machine. Now scale set is like central management. So from portal, I can manage, I can add whatever I want. I can add to those machines, and now they are part of one cluster. and the number of machines you can decide how many numbers of machines you want. You can have auto scale set up for this. We don't have auto scale for availability set. Okay, so in scale set we have all those things, auto scale, and I can centrally manage all these VMs. Let's say I want a data disk to be attached. So in availability set I have to attach that disk over here. I'll have to attach additional disk over here. So all those things are required. In scale set, if I'm just adding that disk will be added to that scale set. And you can see that disk in this VM, in this VM, in this VM as well. Okay, so that will be added to all the VMs. One disk will be added to all the VMs. So it's like central storage. Okay, so that is central management. So scale sets is nothing but a set of identical VMs that we can deploy for our. It's like a cluster. If you have well versed with Windows, in Windows we create clusters, right? So this is auto cluster for us. In the back end, Azure will be deploying number of VMs, and you can have auto scale rule setup, which will make sure that that you have those VMs running, and if that scale set is experiencing high traffic, your one node will be added or one node will be removed. So those things you can achieve. Okay. So in all the VMs, you'll be having same base OS image. So if I have used Windows Server 2019 over here, that will be used over here as well. Okay. You can place all these VMs behind a load balancer. So you can reach to these VMs from that one single IP. Okay. Obviously scale set, this is a scale set, so it's providing high availability. We can use auto scale rules, and we can make sure that number of VMs are getting decreased or increased accordingly. And you can have up to 1,000 instances in one scale set. So obviously that depends on your subscription. So that is the thing. You can have 1,000 instances in one scale set, but that depends on your subscription. What type of subscription do you have? Okay. So that is scale set. Now you can use auto scale. So auto scale is nothing but, let's say when I'm deploying a scale set, I'll be giving a initial instance count. So let's say I want only 2 VM initially, but I want to place a rule that says add the VM or subtract the VM as per the requirement, and the maximum instance will be up to 5. Okay. So how can we achieve that? We can set up a rule like 75% CPU usage. Once it reaches 75% and it stays there for, let's say, 15 minutes, add one extra node. Okay. So if your CPU is at peak at 75% for continuous 15 minutes, Azure will add one node for you. And how many nodes it will be added means, let's say even after adding one node, the CPU is not down again for the next 15 minutes, so it will add another node. Similarly, if after adding 4 nodes, even your CPU is not going down, it will add additional node. Okay, so maximum it will add 5 nodes, whatever you have given while configuring the scale set. Okay. So that we can achieve using scale sets. So it is dynamic in nature, means automatically everything is happening in the back end, and you're scaling out, you can scale in. So I can have that requirement. Let's say after adding one node or 2 nodes, now that 75% is down to 50%, and now it is down to, let's say, 20% for 15 or 20 minutes, whatever time you have decided. And if it's there in 20% for 15 to 20 minutes, if traffic is not that much, just remove the instance, subtract the instance from your scale set. So that we can have over here, scale out, scale in. And you can also schedule events. So let's say in your hosting e-commerce site in this scale set, e-commerce like your Amazon or Flipkart kind of sites. Okay, so Amazon and Flipkart keeps on providing us this sale. So let's say they have sale in the next 3 days, 5th, 6th, or 7th, right? So in 3 days they have sale. So they know for these 3 days they'll be experiencing high traffic. So they'll just schedule the event. at fifth, add extra nodes on seventh, just remove those nodes, so that you can achieve using scale set. Okay, and you have the less overhead, so I don't need to monitor the traffic every time, right? If I'm not using auto scale method, what I'll need to make sure that I have a monitoring team, and I'll have to pay those guys who are monitoring my infra. So I should be having a monitoring team in place. They'll be monitoring, and if alert is triggered, let's say it is 75% for 15 minutes, and I'll have to manually add. This monitoring team will monitor, and they'll manually add one extra node to your cluster. Okay. So if you don't want this thing, you can use auto scale, and you don't need then this team, because Azure is monitoring on your behalf now. Okay. So these are the benefits of using auto scale. So let's see how we can use scale sets and deploy machines. So if you see, all the resources have been deleted. Now if I just refresh, those resources are not present. VM3 and VM4 are not present over here. Similarly, I don't need VM1, so I'll just delete the disk, VM1, availability set, VM1's IP, and VM1's disks. Okay. Now what I'll do, I'll create an scale set. So it's very simple to create a scale set. Just search for VMSS, that is virtual machine scale sets. Click on that scale set and create the scale set. That's all. So these are different compute options we have in Azure. Let's name it. And if you want to place this in different availability zone, you can do that. In uniform, you can manage this centrally, and in flexible, you'll have to manage all these VMs by logging into that VM. Okay. So these are the two different orchestration mode you can use from, and I'll be using, let's say, Windows Server 2019. So this is the base image that will be used. And here, let's say we are using 4 gigabit of memory, and let's give it a username. Okay. Now I'll go to the networking section and let's see. So this belongs to, it is creating the new VNet. I don't want a new VNet. So I'll be placing this in VM demo VNet 01. And this is the NIC attached. Okay, so this will be the NIC which is attached to uh, uh, my virtual machine scale set. If you want to use a load balancer so that you can reach to this virtual machines from, you can load balance and you can balance the load to all the virtual machines. So if you are using 2 instance, then it will send the 50-50 traffic to both the nodes. Okay, so it's just like your cluster. Okay, so I'm not using load balancer. We will be seeing in the next module how you can balance load across your VMs. Here you can decide the number of nodes that you want. Okay, so initial it will be deploying 2 nodes, and you can have a scaling policy defined. So what is a scaling policy? Here it is a manual policy, means you'll have to monitor and you'll have to add the nodes if in case needed. Okay, you can also use the custom thing. So using custom, I'll be deciding, let's say minimum instance count is 1 or 2 and maximum instance count is 3. And what will be the CPU threshold? Scale out means it will add one extra node. So if CPU threshold is 75% for continuous 10 minutes, it will increase 1 node. So now instead of 2 nodes, there will be 3 nodes. Then scale in policy is, if CPU is 25%, then it will decrease the node count by 1. Okay. Now you can also define which VM to be, which node to be removed. So you can remove the newest VM that was added, or you can remove the oldest VM that was there in the scale set. So you can do accordingly. And in management, we have the same thing. We have the upgrade policy. So when you'll be upgrading, when we are upgrading, so it will be the rolling update. So it will roll, means it will just upgrade first VM, then it will upgrade second VM, then it will upgrade third VM. So that you can decide from here. So I'll go with automatic. So it won't upgrade all the VMs at once. It will do in the random order. So so that your services will be running. If you're upgrading your scale set and at the same time your VMs, all the VMs are getting upgraded, so your service will be hampered. Okay. Rest we have as it is. There's nothing difference from our simple VM. And just click on review and create. So it will have at least 2 instances right now deployed as a Windows Server 2019. So you'll be having 2 different VMs deployed to one scale set. So it's like your cluster in Windows. We have the cluster, right? So here we have VM scale set, and whatever command you will be providing, both the machines, means if I'm installing let's say IIS on this scale set, both the machines will have that IIS installed. Okay, got it. So this is VM scale set. Now there's one more feature. While our VM scale set is being deployed, let's discuss this feature, Azure dedicated hosts. So Azure dedicated host is nothing but your hardware server. So right now I'm deploying this virtual machine in one of the hardware server, right? I don't manage in the same hardware. Some other customer has their VMs as well, right? So that is the shared, that is the public shared thing. So third customer has their VM, fourth customer has that VM. Every customer has their workload in that particular hardware server, right? Now dedicated host means you want to make sure that you're deploying your VMs and no other customer is deploying the VM on that particular hardware server. So you can use as your dedicated host, you can create the host pools, and you can use as your dedicated host. And now that dedicated host, that server is dedicated to you, to only one customer. So only your VMs will be kept in that dedicated host. So that is as your dedicated host. So if you want hardware isolation, you can use dedicated host. Okay, you can have control over maintenance. Now if I'm deploying VMs in a shared host, I don't have control over maintenance for that particular hardware. Azure will have its own patching cycle monthly, and Azure will patch that hardware. Okay, so this is Azure dedicated host. Now, given my subscription, I cannot show the demo for dedicated host, but you just need to create dedicated host pool, and you will be then able to deploy the VMs on that dedicated host. Okay. Last topic for today is disk encryption. So it is automatically done by Azure, so you don't need to do anything over here. But
Is it like
yes,
a BitLocker?
yeah, they uses BitLocker for Windows machine and DMcrypt for Linux machine.
Okay.
So it's the same concept, but here they are managing the keys and everything. If you want to use your own key, you can bring your own key, and you can use that key to encrypt your disks, encrypt your data. Okay. So we created one disk, and I have deleted. Now, if you see, our VM skill set is deployed. Now let's wait. That is deployed. I'll show you the encryption. So if you just go to the disk or VM, whatever you have created, and if I click on one of my VM's disk, and there, if you'll see the encryption, it is already encrypted. Okay. So if you'll see the encryption type, it is already encrypted. So Azure makes sure that your data is encrypted, and if someone has access to that, physical access to that particular host and that hard disk where your data is stored, your data is encrypted. So if someone is getting access, he won't be able to read your data. Okay, so that is disk encryption. You can also use your own keys But for that, you need to understand the key vault concept, and you can use your keys to encrypt your operating system disks or your data disks. So whatever disks we are using in Azure, it's always automatically encrypted by default by Azure. So we don't need to do anything extra. But yes, if you want to encrypt it by your own keys, you can do that. So there's that option. Okay. Now coming back to the VM scale set topic, now we have this resource deployed. So this is our VM scale set, and instances, if you see, we have 2 instances running. Okay. Now you can see that you can stop if you want to use different image, you can use that. If you want to delete this thing, you can delete this. Okay, so this is the instance count. Now if I have scale in policies or scale out policies, you can use that. If you want to change size, you can just click on size. Right now what size we are using, so if I just overview, uh, we are using B2S. So if you just want to change the size, you can click on size, and let's say I want 8 GB now, 8 GB of RAM. So I'll click on resize, and my machines will be resized. Okay. So scale in, this is your scale up and scale down. So I've just scaled up to a different size. Initially, I was having a B2S 4 gigabit of RAM. Now I'll be having 8 gigabit of RAM. So, but when you're changing the size, your VMs will be rebooted. Okay. So that don't do this thing in production unless you're having a maintenance window. Okay, so this was our Azure Compute Services. So what we have learned, we have seen deploying a virtual machine. Then we have seen deploying virtual machine using availability set. And then we have seen VM scale set. So VM is just a single instance, availability set to make sure that when you're deploying a VM, they are part of different fault domain and different update domain, so that we don't have a single point of failure. VM scale set, you can consider VM scale set as a cluster. So it will deploy number of VMs, and then you can have the scale in, scale out policies, so that in case there's more workload, there's more traffic, it will be adding extra nodes to your cluster. Okay. So that's all about Azure Compute Services. If you have any question, you can ask.
Can you go back to previous slide?
This one?
Not this one. You have a saying that the reimage. Reimage in essence, setting up the all the settings or changing the
Changing the base image.
base image. That's okay.
Yeah. Okay. So here we have that. Changing the base image.
Okay. Okay.
Any other question? Okay, so if there's no question, we'll conclude over here, and I'll post in the group when we will be having a next session. Okay. Okay, guys. So thank you for joining. I'll be sharing the recording in some time.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Ram.
I hope you have got
Thanks,
some value
Imran.
from the video.
Yes. Thanks.
So from the session. Yep. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.